Chapter 01, 0158 AM. The first siren sounded like an old air raid recording played through broken speakers, a rising wail, then a sudden cut to a calm voice that had been trained not to shake. This is an emergency alert. This is not a test. Mara Vance looked up from the coil of rope in her hands. In the urban search and rescue bay, the fluorescent lights made everything feel like rehearsal, harnesses on pegs, helmets in neat rows, coffee cooling in paper cups. "Did we schedule one?" she asked. Captain Sato was already on the radio with dispatch. He put up one finger without looking at her, listening hard. The voice on the public broadcast continued, repeating, as if repetition could build truth out of noise. Outside, somewhere across Havensport, car alarms began to chain react. Mara's phone buzzed with messages that arrived without context. Video, get Hayich. It's real. Then, from her brother, who drove nights for a courier company, where are you? Stay up. Up, Mara said aloud, tasting the word. It meant rooftops, high-angle rescues, stairwells, ladders. It meant her whole job, but with the city as a client. Sato lowered his handheld. His face, usually carved from calm, had gone too still. We're getting 911 calls about people collapsing, he said. All over. Same time, same description. Drug? Someone offered. No, Sato said. They're saying it's altitude. The broadcast voice gave a time. Activation begins at 2000 AM local. Mara checked the wall clock. The second hand swept toward 12 like it had every day of her adult life, like it hadn't learned it was supposed to scare her. Garrigan, 5-9. Across town, Jay Park stood inside Elevator 3 of the Ascendant Spire with his maintenance bag on the floor and the service panel open. The building was asleep above him, a vertical city of darkened offices and high-priced apartments. He had picked the graveyard shift because it meant fewer complaints, fewer eyes. The siren bled through the elevator speaker as a distorted ghost. He swore under his breath and tapped the panel. The elevator shivered, then continued its climb. Not tonight, he muttered. Not with my hands in the guts. The voice said, not a test. Jay's phone lost signal for a heartbeat, then flooded. A group chat from the technician union lit up with capital letters and panicked links. Someone had pasted a screenshot of a local news anchor mid-sentence, face slack, as if unplugged. He felt the elevator slow. No, he said, and slapped the stop override back and forth like it was a stubborn light switch. On the roof of a 6-story parking garage, Tomas Reyes ran because running was the only thing that had ever made him feel like the ground couldn't claim him. He had started his night with a dare across the gap between the garage and the next building, a narrow office block with a tar roof and a neon sign that hadn't been turned off in years. The gap was only 2 meters. 2 meters and the dark. At the siren, he stopped at the edge and looked down. Cars on the street were braking. People were stepping out, heads tilted, as if the sound was a storm warning. Weird, said Gita, his friend, breathless beside him. Tomas's phone buzzed. His mother's name flashed. He didn't answer because she'd hear the city in his winded silence and make it worse with questions. The broadcast voice said, 2000 AM. Tomas watched the people below like he was looking through glass. Lena Ortiz heard the siren in the control tower at Havensport International and flinched so hard she spilled her tea onto a strip of flight progress cards. That's not ours, her supervisor snapped. Don't touch anything. Lena's headset was alive with pilots, most of them asleep in crew lounges or taxiing under dim lights, and a few international cargo, a late private jet already in the air. Tower, this is Bluebird 4-3. We're getting an emergency alert on board, a pilot said, voice strained. Can you confirm? Lena glanced at the monitors. Weather clean, traffic light, everything normal except the siren that didn't belong to them. Stand by, she said, because saying stand by was what controllers said when there was no sentence that matched the situation. On a balcony high above the waterfront, Victor Rourke leaned against a glass railing and watched the city. His penthouse sat high enough that the wind had a different smell, cleaner, salted by the bay, uncut by exhaust. The siren rose and fell, and he smiled without humor. He had spent his life buying distance from other people's emergencies, higher floors, faster elevators, quieter cars. He had invested in height as if height were an asset class. Below, tiny figures stopped on sidewalks, the city's ordinary motion arrested like a paused film. He glanced at his wristwatch. 0159. At the State University on a hillside, Nadia Alo-Khatib stepped out of the training dorm because she couldn't sleep. Astronaut candidates were supposed to treat every night like launch -1, hydrate, rest, protect the body that would be asked to do impossible work. But she had heard the siren through the thin window glass, and the voice that followed had a cadence too practiced to be student prank. Not a test. She walked toward the athletic fields where the hill dropped away, giving her a view of the lower campus buildings. Lights blinked on in dorms. Faces appeared in windows. The clock on her phone flipped. Who? 1,000. Nothing looked different. Then the courtyard below went strange, like a crowd at a concert when the music cuts. People froze mid-step. A girl with a blanket around her shoulders lifted her head as if listening for something inside her own lungs. The girl's mouth opened. No sound came out. She toppled forward as if someone had swept her legs. The people around her went down in the same beat, 1, 2, 3 dropping like marionettes whose strings had been snipped. Nadia's stomach turned cold. No, she whispered, but her voice felt too loud in the wrong world. At the same moment, Mara's station phones screamed. The radios lit. Dispatch's voice cracked through static. Units, then a swallow. Units, we've got multiple fatalities, unknown cause. Callers report that anyone below. The radio hissed. Somewhere in the city, a line unseen, silent moved through the air. Mara ran without waiting for orders. She grabbed her helmet, her rope bag, and climbed into the nearest rig. Sirens were useless now. The city already screamed. Jay felt it first as pressure in his ears, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then his chest tightened as if the air in the elevator had thickened into syrup. He took a reflexive breath. And the breath didn't land. It was like inhaling nothing worse than nothing, a hollow that offered no grip. His lungs seized, his eyes watered, his body tried to cough and found no traction. He stumbled, grabbed the rail, and forced himself to exhale and inhale again, smaller this time, controlled. The pressure eased, not because the air fixed itself, but because the elevator had kept moving upward. He looked at the floor indicator, 11, 12, 13. Below some height, the air betrayed you. Above it, you lived. Tomas watched Gita step back from the edge to check her phone. She was laughing, a nervous little sound. Look, she said, people are. Her laugh cut off mid-syllable. Her eyes went wide like she'd seen a ledge appear where none existed. She lifted both hands to her throat. Tomas grabbed her wrist. Gita? She tried to breathe. Her chest jerked once. Then she folded, weight going slack in his grip. He dragged her away from the edge, heart slamming, and realized he couldn't help her because whatever had stolen her air wasn't in his hands. Below them, on the street, a man in a suit stopped moving and fell face first. A cyclist pitched sideways. A dog yanked its leash free and ran in circles around its fallen owner, barking at a silence that didn't care. Lena's headset erupted. Tower, we've got passengers collapsing in the cabin, Bluebird 4-3 said, breath ragged. It's like they can't breathe. What the hell is this? Another voice cut in. This is Mercy 1, medevac. We're airborne. People on the ground are dropping. Confirm? Lena's hands went numb on the console. She looked through the tower glass at the terminal below. Through binoculars, she saw a baggage handler in a reflective vest stagger and fall. Her supervisor swore and slapped the emergency line to FAA headquarters. The broadcast voice repeated, as if it had no more information to offer, at 2000 AM local, the boundary rises. Victor Vorik watched the waterfront promenade empty itself without anyone moving away. It wasn't evacuation, it was subtraction. He saw the first person collapse on the pier, and something in him that wasn't used to fear tried to bargain. This couldn't be real, not like this, not everywhere. Then he saw a line of joggers on a lower road drop in sequence, like dominoes knocked by an invisible finger. His phone rang, his security chief. Sir, the man said, voice tight, we have reports. Victor watched the second hand on his watch continue its indifferent orbit. Get everyone to the roof, Victor said, now. The roof? The security chief hesitated. Sir, that's... Do it, Victor snapped, and locked the stairwell behind them. He heard himself say it and hated that it came out so naturally. Height as policy, height as triage. On the hill, Nadia ran down the stairs of the dorm 2 at a time. The higher campus was still breathing. Below, bodies carpeted the courtyards and walkways in a pattern too clean to be accident. She saw a student halfway up the exterior stairwell of the engineering building, panting, safe for now. His eyes met hers, and she saw the same calculation ignite. Up means live. She pulled out her phone and opened a barometric altitude app, the kind climbers use to brag about summits. The number wobbled, uncertain. It read 38 meters. She looked down the hill and pictured an invisible plane at some threshold. Everyone below it had been cut away. It's not poison, she whispered, mind racing through mechanisms. It's not airborne. It's a boundary. At H 2007, the city began to learn what a boundary meant. Mara's rid hit gridlock within 3 blocks. Cars had stopped wherever people had died, at green lights, in crosswalks, on ramps, leaving the living trapped behind the dead. On foot, Sato barked. Mara threw her rope bag over her shoulder and ran. In the street, survivors moved like insects climbing the sides of buildings, pulling themselves up fire escapes, scrambling onto parked vans, clinging to streetlight poles. A man was halfway up a billboard ladder screaming for his wife below. His wife lay still on the pavement. "Keep climbing," Mara shouted. "Don't look down." She didn't know if it mattered. She just knew that stopping did. Jay forced the elevator higher, overriding call buttons, ignoring pounding fists on doors as the cab passed floors where people begged to get in. He had never hated himself for doing his job until now. At 8:05:59, the siren returned, a softer tone now, like a machine sighing to announce it was done. Mara stood on the roof of a 13-story apartment building, lungs burning, looking across a city that had become two worlds, a lower one of stillness and a higher one of clustered bodies, shivering in the wind. Beside her, Tomas sat with Gita's head in his lap. Her face was too calm. Lena stared at a radar screen that showed planes holding in chaotic circles, pilots begging for instructions that didn't exist. Victor Rourke watched the first light of dawn catch the tops of towers, turning their glass into blades. On the hill, Nadia wrote numbers in a notebook with shaking hands. At 06 sounded, the line stopped rising. No one below it got back up. Chapter 02, 13,020. By midday, Havensport had learned new geography. The old maps, streets, districts, subway lines were jokes. The only lines that mattered now were vertical, stairwells, ladders, fire escapes, elevator shafts. The city had become a stack of thin kingdoms, each roof a patch of ground declared precious because it was still breathing. Mara spent the morning counting survivors, and the afternoon counting the dead without looking at their faces. Her team moved from rooftop to rooftop on improvised lines, hauling up water jugs and first aid kits, leaving behind those they couldn't move before nightfall. The same question came at every door: how high? No one had a perfect answer. Phones lied about altitude, barometers drifted, people measured by floors and prayer. Jay found Mara on the roof of the apartment building where she'd ended the night. He looked like he hadn't stopped moving since the siren grime on his cheek, knuckles raw. "You're the elevator guy," Tomas said, not friendly. The teen sat on an overturned HVAC unit, guarding a battered backpack like it was a child. Jay's eyes flicked to the bundle of blankets near the stairwell door. He understood without being told. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm the elevator guy." Mara watched him the way she watched unstable walls, assessing whether he would hold. "We need vertical transport," she said. "Stairs are a bottleneck. People panic. They trample. You saw it." "I saw a lot," Jay said. His throat worked as if he still couldn't trust the air. "Elevators aren't a solution if the power dies at 1059. "Then keep it from dying," Mara said. Jay barked a laugh with no humor. "Lady, the grid's already dying. Half the substations are unmanned." A rotor thumped overhead. A helicopter, news or police, hard to tell now, skated between towers. People on roofs waved like castaways. The helicopter didn't stop. At Havensport International, Lena had been awake for 26 hours. The tower became a lighthouse in a sea of static. She coordinated what she could, medevacs to roof pads, cargo jets diverting, private helicopters stealing fuel and fleeing inland. The morning news had turned into lists, highest buildings, nearest hills, anything that had numbers attached. At 8:0900, the first rumor hardened into fact. The line had not reset. It had paused at whatever height it reached at 8:06 thoudered. By noon, people spoke of it like a tide mark. Mara learned it from Nadia, who arrived on the roof with a notebook full of equations and a face that looked too young to carry that much certainty. "It stopped at about 250 meters, Nadia said, flipping the notebook around. "Depending on sea level reference, it'll start again tonight from there." Mara stared at the numbers. "How do you know?" "Because the people below didn't die at random," Nadia said. "It was a plane, a boundary condition. Something in the air changes below a threshold." "You're a, candidate," Nadia said. "Astronaut program. I was training at the university. We have instruments." "Instruments," Tomas echoed, bitter. "Tell your instruments to bring my friend back." Nadia's gaze softened, but she didn't offer sympathy like a bandage. "I'm sorry," she said, "but if you're asking me what comes next is that 250 meters becomes 300, then 4, then 5. Jay closed his eyes. "Skyscrapers," he murmured. "Mountains," Nadia corrected. "Eventually." On the horizon, the ascendant spire cut the sky like a needle. It had been expensive arrogance yesterday. Today, it was a lifeboat everyone could see. By afternoon, smoke rose from lower neighborhoods where cooking fires had been left unattended, where candles toppled beside bodies no one could reach. By 1800, rooftop rules began. Some roofs posted guards with guns, some posted signs, no room, some posted tariffs, waiter for height, food for ox SS. In the ascendant spire, Victor Work convened his people on the 78th floor, high enough that they could breathe without counting seconds. This building is an asset, he told them, voice smooth as glass. It is infrastructure. It is shelter. His security chief, Grant, shifted uncomfortably. For how many, sir? Victor didn't answer that directly. We will be orderly, he said. We will be selective. Anyone can panic. We will build. Build what? Grant asked. Victor looked out at the skyline where cranes stood like praying mantises over half-finished high-rises. Higher, he said. At 1030, the city began to climb again. The siren returned at 1:45, right on time. It did not care that people had slept in coats on roofs. It did not care that children had cried until they were hoarse. It did not care that the dead lay in streets like punctuation. Last call, someone shouted in a stairwell somewhere. Last call. Mara and her team moved like they were sweeping a building for fire. They knocked on doors, yelled at balconies, threw ropes to people stuck on mid-level ledges. The bottleneck at the stairwell of Civic Tower became a crush. Hundreds pressed upward. Someone screamed that the stairs were blocked. Another voice screamed that the roof was full. Mara forced her way into the stairwell, wedging herself against the wall to make a channel. Single file, she shouted. Hands on the rail. Breathe slow. At 8:02,000, the crush turned animal. Nadia watched her altitude app wobble and then settle, as if the world had agreed on the new truth. The number read 252 meters. Below, through the stairwell window, she saw movement on a lower landing stop, a man who had tried to rest. He bent forward to suck in air. He fell. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was a collective intake as hundreds realized that the air itself could be a cliff. The line rose. At 2007, it jumped. It wasn't visible, but people felt it as a sudden wrongness. Breaths that stopped working on a landing that had been safe a second ago. Hands going slack on rails. Bodies slumping against those still climbing. Mara saw a woman's eyes roll back and caught her before she hit the stairs. Keep moving, Mara told the people behind her, voice a growl. Don't stop. The woman's weight was dead weight. Mara had carried a lot of dead weight in her life, collapsed beams, unconscious hikers, bags of gear. This was worse because it had been alive 10 seconds ago. She hooked the woman under one arm and shoved upward with her shoulder, driving the crowd like a wedge. Somewhere above, Tomas ran along a rooftop edge, leaping a gap with a rope in his teeth, because Mara had asked him to bring a spare line to the next building and because doing something was better than sitting with grief. He landed hard, skidded, and kept running. At 0558, the siren softened again. On the Civic Tower roof, Mara sat with her back against a water tank and watched dawn arrive like an insult. Below them, the stairwell was silent except for the living's shallow breaths. Nadia wrote one sentence in her notebook, underlined twice. IT starts where it stopped. Chapter 03, 19,004-2. On the third day, the Ascendant Spire became a country. Victor Works people sealed the lower entrances with chain and welded plate. They posted guards on the mid-level sky lobby where the express elevators began. They hung a banner, Work Dynamics, a logo like a stylized peak where a motivational poster used to be. Mara reached the sky lobby with two of her team and Tomas's courier. Jay came because the elevators only ran when he touched them, like stubborn animals that recognized their handler. The guards' rifles were clean, their eyes were not. We're bringing supplies, Mara said, holding up a crate of bandages and antibiotics like an offering. Grant, Victor's security chief, stepped forward. Supplies are welcome, he said, polite as a knife. People are not. Behind Mara, Tomas made a small, furious sound. Jay put a hand on the kid's shoulder without looking at him. Mara kept her voice even. There are kids on roofs with no water. There are seniors who can't climb stairs. We can use your elevators. We can move people up before the line rises. Grant smiled. We can, he agreed. So can you. Stairs are free. You'll let them die, Mara said. Grant's smile didn't change. We'll let them make choices, he said, same as everyone else. From the glass wall of the lobby, Mara could see the harbor. Boats drifted aimlessly, their decks too low to be safe at night. The water looked like a lying mirror. Jay leaned close to Mara. They've got the express codes, he murmured. I can run a car up to the 80s, but if they catch me, they'll throw me off this floor. Mara's jaw clenched. We do it anyway, she said. That night, Jay rode elevator 5 with 12 people pressed shoulder to shoulder, a pregnant woman, 2 teenagers with scraped hands, an old man in a suit jacket like armor. Mara rode on top of the car, crammed into the maintenance space with a headlamp, because if the elevator failed, she wanted to be the first to know. Tomas ran the stairs beside the shaft, sending updates by radio whenever his breath allowed. 01056, Tomas panted. You're, good, people are moving. In the tower, Lena's voice crackled through a handheld Mara had scavenged from the control tower's emergency cache. Mara, traffic's insane, Lena said. If you need a helicopter. We're inside, Mara said. Elevator. Silence. Then, Lena, softer. Be careful. We lost 3 medevacs last night. They dropped mid-hover when the line hit their altitude. Mara pictured a helicopter falling like a stone into the dead city. Copy, she said. At 02000, the siren sounded through the elevator speaker in a tinny echo. Someone in the car began to pray. Someone else began to sob, the sound trapped between strangers. Mara watched the floor indicator, 62, 64, 64. The elevator jerked. The lights flickered once. Jay swore and hit the panel. Come on, he whispered as if the machine had ears. Not now. The car stopped with a shudder between floors. In the sudden stillness, Mara heard the building's bones, the faint creak of steel, the distant wind. She heard, too, a new sound, so low it was almost imagined, a rising hiss that seemed to come from below. The line. Jay tried the emergency call button. Nothing. He tried the override. Nothing. We're stuck, the pregnant woman whispered. Her hand went to her stomach as if she could shield the life inside from physics. Mara's radio popped. Tomas's breath in her ear. Mara, he said, panic sharpening his voice. The stairwell landing at 59 people? His voice cut to static mid-word. The hiss below grew louder, not in volume but in presence, like pressure building in a sealed pipe. Mara forced her own breathing slow. Everybody listen, she said, voice hard. Do not hyperventilate, do not waste air. Jay, can you open the doors? Jay's hand shook as he popped the service key. The doors trembled and parted 2 inches, revealing concrete and the black gap of the shaft. Cold air slid in, carrying the smell of oil and metal. The hiss was stronger now, crawling up the shaft like a living thing. Up, Mara said. We go up, one at a time. Jay stared at the cables above the car. Climb that, he said. People will die. They'll die if we don't, Mara said. She swung herself through the gap, boots finding the top of the elevator car. Above her, the emergency ladder ran along the shaft wall in bolted rungs. The first breath she took in the open shaft was wrong too thin, too sharp, and she realized how close they already were. The line was climbing faster than their stalled car. Mara, Jay said behind her, voice small, I've never asked anyone to do this. Then ask now, Mara said, loud. Jay turned to the people inside the cab. Hands on the rungs, he ordered, voice turning into a technician's command. No jumping, no pushing. You go when she tells you. You keep moving. The old man in the suit jacket tried to step onto the car roof and froze, eyes wide, his chest hitched. Mara grabbed his collar and hauled him up like a bag of sand. Breathe slow, she told him, and didn't know if it mattered. Below, the hiss became a certainty. A man in the back of the elevator took a panicked, deep breath. He collapsed sideways, his body thudding against the doors. The pregnant woman screamed. Someone tried to turn away from the dead body as if the sight could infect them. Move, Mara shouted. Move now. They climbed. Above them, at floor 70, someone had propped open a stairwell door and was watching the shaft with a flashlight. A face appeared, pale as paper. Hurry, the stranger yelled, voice echoing down. It's coming. Mara climbed until her arms trembled and her throat burned. She felt the boundary behind them like heat at her heels. When she reached the open door, she threw herself through and rolled onto carpet that smelled of clean money. Hands grabbed her. People dragged others up behind her one by one, pulling like fishermen hauling nets. Jay came last, face slick with sweat, eyes red-rimmed. He slammed the stairwell door shut as if metal could block an invisible plane. For a few seconds, they listened to the building. The hiss passed. On the other side of the door, someone in the elevator cab took a breath and died without a sound. Mara sat with her back against the door, shaking. Jay slid down beside her. Thank you, the pregnant woman whispered, tears streaking her face. Mara couldn't answer. Her jaw hurt from clenching. In her hand, her radio crackled back to life. Mara, Lena said, voice faint with relief and exhaustion. You still there? Mara swallowed. Still here, she said. On the roof of the ascendant spire, Victor Rourke watched the lights of lower buildings wink out as generators died, as if the city were sinking into the sea. He listened to reports of the elevator failure and the bodies left behind and felt an unfamiliar sensation. Not guilt, exactly. Something colder. Capacity. Chapter 04-0117. By the end of the first week, people stopped asking if the line was real and started asking what it wanted. Kiran Dutta answered the way she answered storms, with measurements. She found Mara and the others on a roof that had become an unofficial USAR post tarps for shade, radio antennas lashed to railings, a patchwork of sleeping bags. Kiran carried a duffel full of weather instruments like holy objects. "You're the balloon lady," Tomas said, squinting at her. Kiran smiled once. "Balloonist, meteorologist, I'm also very tired." Mara gestured her in. "Show me something useful," she said, not unkind. Kiran pulled out a handheld anemometer, a barometer, and a battered notebook with graphs drawn in pencil. "The boundary's consistent," she said, "height-wise, time-wise. But there are surges, little jumps, and I think they're worse around large metal structures." Jay snorted. "Everything in this city is metal." "Not like crane booms," Kiran said, turning to him. "Not like elevator shafts." Shay went still. "You think my elevators are making it worse?" "I think," Kiran said carefully, "that conductive materials may influence the boundary's behavior. Maybe it's interacting with electromagnetic fields. I don't know. But if we're going to build higher, we need to know what not to build with." Nadia listened with her notebook open. "The boundary isn't following terrain," she said. "It's a plane. It doesn't care about buildings. If materials change how it behaves, that's local distortion, not the main phenomenon." Mara rubbed her eyes. "So what's the main phenomenon?" Nadia didn't look up when she answered. "Something anchored outside our frame," she said. "Something that makes altitude matter." Victor Rourke supplied the next escalation. His people rolled in just after sunset with a convoy of drones and men in harnesses. They set up floodlights on the roof like a film set. Grant approached Mara with a clipboard. "Rourke Dynamics is establishing a vertical works program," Grant announced, as if reading from a press release could control panic. "We're moving operations to the east side construction yards. Crane access, structural steel. We're inviting skilled labor." "Inviting," Thomas muttered, "with guns." Grant ignored him. "Participants will receive guaranteed shelter above the boundary," he continued. "Food allocations, medical care, in exchange for labor and compliance." "A height tax," Mara said. Grant's smile was thin. "An exchange," he corrected. "Altitude is limited. We're making it expandable." Mara looked past him at the men in harnesses. Some were USAR, rope access techs, ironworkers. Some wore Rourke's logo. Their eyes held the same hungry calculation. If they were building the ladder, they wanted their name on it. "Where's Victor?" Mara asked. Grant's gaze flicked upward, as if the billionaire lived above even the roof. "He's occupied," Grant said. At 1007, Mara stood at the edge of a construction site rooftop, staring at the black lattice of cranes that reached into the sky. Below them, the city was a graveyard. Above them, wind hammered the metal. The works program had become a shantytown in a day. Hundreds of people camped on partially finished floors, clipped to guardrails, sharing oxygen tanks like contraband because the higher air felt thinner and colder even before the line came. Mara ran her hand over her rope. It felt like a lifeline and a noose. "We do this," she told her team, "and we don't let them turn it into a slaughterhouse." Jay checked the temporary hoist controls. "This rig wasn't built for crowd control," he said. "One failure and—" "Then you don't let it fail," Tomas said, surprising them with the seriousness in his voice. Nadia stood beside the crane operator, watching the boom sway. "If the boundary keeps rising at the current rate," she said, "we have days, not weeks, before everything here is too low." Kiran adjusted her goggles. "Wind shear's going to get brutal," she murmured. "The higher we go, the less forgiving physics is." At 0145, the siren sounded again, muffled by distance and wind. "Last call," someone yelled across the construction deck. "Climb, clip in." Mara watched people scramble up ladders bolted to concrete cores. She watched a man drop a carabiner and scream as if he'd dropped his own heart. At 2000, the air below them changed. Even from this height, Mara felt it as a subtle shift, like the world's lungs had tightened. She keyed her radio. "All teams, report," she said. Static. Then voices, ragged with fear. "Team 2 is up." "Team 4? Lost 1." Mara swallowed. "Keep moving," she said, because that was still the only instruction that fit. At 2038, a microsurge hit. The boundary leapt upward. Chiron's barometer needle jerked as if slapped, and a scream tore through the night from a lower platform. Mara turned and saw a worker on a ladder freeze. His hands, halfway to the next rung, went slack. He fell backward. His safety line caught him, swinging his body into the air like a pendulum. Below him, 3 people were climbing the same ladder, eyes wide as the falling body arched toward them. "Cut it," someone shouted. The line was turning the man into an obstacle. His weight threatened to knock others off. His line became a weapon. Mara didn't think. She clicked her ascender, ran to the ladder edge, and swung out over empty air, her own rope screaming through her device. The worker's face was gray, his mouth open in a soundless gasp. His eyes were still alive with terror, even though his body had already quit. Mara hooked her arm around his harness and grabbed the line above his chest. Her knife was strapped to her thigh. She drew it. For a heartbeat, she saw his name tag, Eli. She cut. The severed rope snapped upward. Eli's body dropped, swinging away into darkness. The ladder below cleared. The climbers kept moving, sobbing, alive. Mara reeled herself back in, hands shaking so hard she could barely operate her ascender. When she pulled herself onto the platform, Tomas stared at her with something like horror. "You," he began. Mara couldn't look at him. "If I hadn't," she said, voice hoarse, "they'd all be dead." Above them, the crane boom stretched higher, indifferent. Somewhere in the ascendant spire, Victor Rourke watched the construction feeds from a tablet and made notes, loss rates, labor efficiency, the cost of panic. At A0559, the siren softened. Mara sat on a steel beam and stared at the horizon until dawn burned her eyes. Altitude wasn't just currency. It was debt, accruing interest every night. Chapter 05, 0152. The storm arrived like punishment. It had been building all day, thick clouds pushing in from the bay, the wind turning sharp. Karan warned them at noon gusts at upper levels, turbulence that would make Crane work suicidal. Victor Rourke overruled her. "We can't pause," Grant told Mara, repeating Victor's words like scripture. "The boundary doesn't pause, neither do we." By evening, rain hammered the half-finished towers. Water ran down stairwells in sheets, tarps snapped and tore. People huddled against concrete cores, clutching rope lines, listening to the wind whine through steel like a flute. Mara had just finished splinting a broken wrist when Tomas slid across the wet deck and shoved a note at her. "Found a way across, roof to roof, fast." "Across to what?" Mara shouted over the wind. Tomas pointed through rain to a neighboring building with a higher roof line only 10 meters higher, but 10 meters mattered now. A line had been rigged between them, sagging under the weather. "Who said that?" Mara asked. "Does it matter?" Tomas yelled back. "It'll save people." At AO145, the siren returned, muffled by rain but no less precise. The storm made the sound worse, like the sky itself was wailing. Mara looked down. Far below, lightning flashed over streets where bodies still lay, washed clean by rain that couldn't wash away what had happened. "We move," she told her team, "now." Jay met her gaze. "Elevators are a dead dream tonight," he said. "The power's flickering. If a car stops in the shaft." "Then we don't use them," Mara said. They funneled people toward the zip line, 2 by 2, clipped into pulleys, hands white on the tether. The wind shoved at them like a bully. The line swayed. Each person who launched became a pendulum in a rain-dark void. On the radio, Lena's voice cut through static. "Havensport Tower to all units, we've got a fire in the mid-levels of the west side block, smoke rising. If you're above..." Her voice stuttered, then steadied. "If you're above, move laterally away from the plume. The boundary won't kill you if you can't breathe because of smoke. Over." Smoke. Mara's stomach sank. Fire was always vertical. Fire climbed. At 1058, a lightning strike hit a transformer somewhere below. The construction site lights blinked out. For a second, the world was only wind and rain and the distant siren. Then, emergency generators coughed on, throwing harsh light over faces slick with water and fear. Tomas clipped in first because he always went first. He launched across the gap and vanished into rain. Mara sent a mother with 2 small kids next. The kids clung to her like barnacles, eyes huge. The pulley screeched as it took their weight. Halfway across, the wind hit them sideways. The mother swung hard, slammed into the building's edge on the far side, and screamed. Mara's hands clenched. "Pull them in!" she shouted to the team on the far roof. At 02,000, the boundary rose into the storm. Mara felt it as a sudden wrongness in her lungs, the air turning brittle. The rain didn't stop it. The wind didn't stop it. The line didn't care about weather. Below them, the fire Lena had warned about lit the rain from underneath with a sick orange glow. Smoke poured upward, thick and oily, and then the wind grabbed it and flung it sideways toward their roofs. People screamed and tried to run, but there was nowhere to run except up and across. Jay grabbed Mara's arm. "Look," he shouted. Through the rain, Mara saw a lower platform where a dozen people had been waiting their turn for the zipline. The microsurge hit them like a slap. 1 second they were alive, shoving forward. The next, their bodies sagged against each other and slid down the wet concrete like spilled laundry. The living above them saw it happen, and panic became a physical force. The crowd surged toward the zipline anchor. Mara shoved herself between bodies and the anchor point. "Back," she roared. "You push and you die." Someone she never saw who grabbed the zipline's anchor strap, fingers fumbled at the knot. Mara felt the strap shift. "Stop," she screamed, "and dove." The strap snapped loose anyway. The zipline sagged, then whipped upward as tension released. On the line, midway across, was Tomas. He swung wildly as the tether changed angle, rain-blind, his hands fighting the pulley. For a heartbeat, his silhouette dangled against lightning. Mara's body moved before her mind caught up. She clipped her own harness to the remaining anchor line and threw herself to the edge, grabbing the zipline with both hands. The wet rope burned her palms. "Hold," she screamed to the far roof. "Haul." Tomas shouted something lost in wind. His body slammed into the building edge, then bounced. The pulley screeched. Mara anchored the line with her weight, her arms shaking. Jay grabbed her waist and braced behind her, becoming ballast. Together, they held the world steady long enough for the far team to reel Tomas in. When they finally hauled him onto the far roof, Tomas lay on his side, coughing rain, eyes wild. He looked back across the gap at Mara like he hadn't known she could be a net. Mara didn't smile. Her hands were bleeding. The smoke reached them minutes later. People began to cough, to gag, to pull shirts over mouths. At 03:14, the fire found something in the construction core that liked to burn. Flames shot up a stairwell like a torch. The safe zone filled with smoke. Mara tasted ash and understood the new rule. Even above the line, you could die of ordinary things. At 005059, the siren softened and the boundary paused. The storm did not. When dawn came, it revealed cracked concrete, twisted rebar, and a crane boom that had bent under wind stress like a tired spine. Jay stared at the damage and spoke what everyone had been avoiding. "We can't stay here," he said. "Even if we're high enough, the building won't be." Chapter 06, 14,005. They called it the Dawn Ledger. Every morning, people made lists: who was alive, who was missing, what was broken, what could be traded, what could be stolen, what height the boundary had paused at when the siren softened. Nadia made her own list, private and terrifying. She wrote down the boundary's height at A6 thuttered and the rate at which it had climbed and the microsurges Kieran recorded and the way the time never drifted. She plotted it against the stars. The pattern that emerged made her skin itch. At 14,005, she gathered Mara, Jay, Lena, Tomas, and Kieran in a wind-sheltered alcove on the construction deck. Victor Rourke was absent, always absent when hard truths arrived, but Grant hovered nearby, listening with the wary attention of someone who expected to be blamed. Nadia opened her notebook. "It isn't rising," she said. Mara blinked. "It's literally rising." "It appears to rise relative to the ground," Nadia said, "but the boundary behaves like a plane fixed in an inertial frame. Earth is moving through it, or Earth's reference is being lowered relative to it. That's why it activates at the same local time and why it resumes where it stopped." Jay's face tightened. "Say that in words that help." Nadia swallowed. "It means climbing buys time, but time is the only thing you're buying," she said. "The boundary will overtake everything we can build. If it's fixed relative to space, then even orbit isn't automatically safe." Kieran's eyes widened. "You think it goes that high?" "Not yet," Nadia said. "But if the baseline keeps increasing." "We don't have years," Mara said. "We have days. Look around." Nadia nodded. "Which is why we need to stop thinking like city people," she said. "We need altitude that already exists." "Mountains," Tomas said, voice flat. "Mountains," Nadia agreed. Lena's voice came through the radio, tinny but urgent. "Mara, you there? I've got something." Mara keyed the handheld. "Go." "We're losing the airport," Lena said. "The boundary pause point is climbing into approach paths. Med flights can't hover at safe altitudes and still land. But," she took a breath, "but planes can climb. If you can get to an aircraft and keep it above the boundary during the window, you can outrun it for a few hours." Jay stared at the skyline, at the dead streets. "How do we get to the airport?" he asked. "Ground level is a cemetery." during daylight, Mara said, before 2 a.m. kills what's below the pause line. Grant cleared his throat. Mr. Rourke has helicopters, he offered. Tomas barked a laugh. For who? Grant's jaw tightened. For essential personnel, he said. We're all essential, Mara said. Grant's eyes flicked to her rope, her hands, the way people moved around her like she was a pillar. Not in his calculus, he said quietly. That was when Mara made her own decision, as clean and brutal as a cut rope. We leave, she said, tonight. Jay's head snapped up. Tonight? We'll be on the streets at. At 2 a.m. we need to be above the boundary, Mara said, so we won't be on the streets. We'll be on the bridge towers. Silence fell. Havensport Harbor Bridge was a steel and cable spine that crossed the bay toward the inland hills. Its towers rose higher than most roofs, high enough to be safe for now, maybe. Its access stairs were narrow, its cables were awed. It was also exposed to wind and, more importantly, to people. At 19 Anamest, the exodus began. They moved with fat packs and ropes and stolen oxygen canisters, threading through abandoned streets that smelled like rain and old blood. They avoided intersections where bodies clogged lanes. They avoided buildings where the living had barricaded themselves in, guns raised. Tomas ran ahead, scouting routes, a shadow on broken pavement. He carried a small radio and the kind of courage that looked like recklessness until you needed it. Karen kept glancing at the sky, reading wind like scripture. Jay kept glancing at every building they passed, noting elevator shafts and stairwells out of habit, as if he could map vertical escape routes even while moving horizontally. At 01 Falfant 2, they reached the bridge. The bridge had become a funnel. Hundreds, maybe thousands, had the same idea. They crowded the access ramps, shoving toward the narrow tower stairs. The siren began at 01:45, and people's faces turned upward in unison, like sunflowers tracking a deadly sun. We won't make it, Jay said, voice tight. Mara looked at the tower, at the long flight of stairs already packed with bodies. She looked at the suspension cables, thick as tree trunks, studded with maintenance rungs. We're climbing the cable, she decided. That's insane, someone behind them shouted, hearing her. So is staying down here, Mara snapped. At 01,008, Mara clipped her harness to the first maintenance rung and began to climb. The cable vibrated under her weight, humming with the movement of hundreds of bodies around it. Wind slapped her face. Below, the crowd surged and cursed. Tomas climbed above her fast, hand sure. Jay climbed slower, every motion cautious, his body remembering elevator shafts more than open air. At 02,000, the boundary rose. The air near the bridge deck turned wrong. Screams erupted as people on the ramp still too low gasped and dropped. The living felt the dead slump against their legs like collapsing sandbags. The crowd's push became panic. Mara climbed faster. At 02,006, a microsurge hit, and the boundary jumped into the lower stairwell of the tower. People there, halfway to safety, crumpled. The bodies jammed the stairs. Above the jam, survivors clawed upward, sobbing. Mara looked down once and regretted it immediately. The bridge deck was chaos, living bodies scrambling over dead ones, people clinging to railings, some leaping for ladders and missing. She didn't have the luxury of looking again. At 0320, they reached a maintenance platform high on the tower, wind screaming through steel. They huddled there, clipped in, shivering, listening to the boundary hiss upward beneath them like a tide they could hear but not see. At 0559, the siren softened. When dawn broke over the bay, Havensport looked smaller than it had ever looked, as if the city itself had begun to sink. Beyond the bridge, inland hills rose like promises. Mara stared at them and tried not to calculate how many people would die before reaching them. Chapter 07, 16,030. They walked uphill for days and nights, and the hill kept moving. The boundary starting height climbed faster now. Nadia's notebook filled with ugly curves, no longer a steady line, but a slope that steepened week by week. Karen stopped calling the jumps micro when one surge stole 30 meters in a blink. Havensport shrank behind them into a blue haze. The inland foothills became crowded with tents on rooftops, then with camps on ridgelines, then with people sleeping wherever the land gave them a few extra meters above the next night's starting line. By the time they reached the town of Pinegrove, once a ski tourist stop, now at choke point altitude, had become a language everyone spoke. What's your base? Strangers asked, meaning, what elevation can you reliably reach before 2,000? What's your climb? They asked, meaning, how many meters can you gain between 2 and 6 before the line catches you? Pinegrave's main street was packed with caravans, bikes, shopping carts, pickup trucks loaded with ladders and sheets of plywood. People had lashed furniture into crude scaffolds. Everything was becoming a rung. The state arrived too, late and tired and pretending it wasn't. At the foot of the gondola station, soldiers in rain ponchos handed out numbered wristbands under a banner that read, Altitude Authority. A line of people snaked down the road. The gondola cars hung above them like white capsules on a cable. Lottery, a sergeant shouted. 50 seats per run, no pushing. If you push, you lose your band. 50 seats. Mara watched the crowd's faces turn hungry. 50 seats meant 50 lives and 1,000 deaths spread out across the night. Jay stared up at the gondola machinery with a technician's reflex. That drive system can't run all night, he murmured. Not at full load. It'll overheat. Tomas was already moving, slipping through the crowd like a rumor. He returned with a folded flyer. The ascenders meet at dusk. Climb clean. Be chosen. Mara crumpled it in her fist. Great, she said. We've got religion now. They found Lena at the edge of the makeshift airstrip above town, where a flattened stretch of road had become a runway for desperate pilots. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in the way her eyes scanned the sky like it was an enemy. Mara didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until she saw Lena and exhaled. You got out, Mara said. Barely, Lena replied. Her voice carried the same calm it always had, but the calm had sharp edges now. Tower was too low by day 6. We moved operations uphill. We're chasing the line like everyone else. How long until this is too low? Nadia asked, cutting straight to the only question that mattered. Lena's mouth tightened. If the curve keeps steepening, she said, a week, maybe less. Then it's aircraft or nothing. Kieran looked toward the mountains above Pinegrove, peaks jagged and white. Aircraft can't hover forever, she said. Fuel runs out, and wind up there. I know, Lena said, but it buys hours. Sometimes hours are the difference between a pass and a pile of bodies. At 20 Souden, Pinegrove's loudspeakers blared a recorded voice. Someone's idea of order. Prepare for ascent, no fires on the gondola platforms. Keep walkways clear. Order was a story. Fear was the truth. At 01,000, the gondola line became a riot with straps. People surged toward the station, wristbands forgotten, fists raised. Soldiers fired warning shots into the air. The sound made everyone flinch upward, as if bullets could punch a hole through the boundary. Mara and her team didn't go near the station. They followed Lena up a service trail behind the maintenance sheds, climbing switchbacks through trees and wet rock. Sato climbed with them, older than Mara but still stubborn. He had been quiet since Havensport, as if saving his words for something that might matter again. How high are we? He asked that 01,052, breath steaming. Nadia checked her barometer. Baseline's around 1,400 tonight, she said. It starts at 1,450. It'll climb at least 500 more before dawn. Sato whistled softly. So we climb a kilometer before breakfast, he said. Every night. Tomas grinned without humor. You get breakfast? At 0158, they heard screaming from the gondola station below, carried up the slope by wind, a different kind of siren. The official siren began at 01,045 and didn't care. It rose and fell, the same tone it had been in Havensport, like a signature. At 02,000, the boundary returned. Mara felt it in her chest even before she looked at the numbers. The air tightened. Somewhere below them, the crowd's roar changed into something sharper, then broke into scattered shrieks as the starting line cut away those still too low. They climbed harder. At 02,019, a microsurge hit so violently Kieran stumbled. Nadia's barometer needle jumped. Mara grabbed Kieran's harness before she could slide off the wet path. It's accelerating, Nadia said, voice thin. The rise rate. A sound like thunder cracked above them. The mountain answered the crowd. Snow and rock broke loose from the ridgeline, a slab releasing with the inevitability of physics. It roared down the chute toward the trail, a white wall lit faintly by headlamps. Avalanche, someone screamed. There was nowhere to run except up, and up was a cliff. Mara clipped to a tree with shaking hands. Clip in, she shouted. Everybody clip. The first wave hit the trail like a punch. Bodies slammed into harnesses. Ropes snapped tight. Tomas screamed as his feet left the ground, dangling, kicking in empty air as snow tore past beneath him. Mara held her rope with both hands until her shoulders felt like they were splitting. Sato, above her, saw the anchor tree begin to bend. Its roots, shallow in wet soil, were being pulled by the weight of desperate people. He didn't hesitate. He clipped his own line to the tree and then around his waist, doubling the load onto himself. He dug his boots into the mud and became a human anchor. The tree groaned but held. The avalanche poured past, dragging loose snow and rocks and screams down into darkness. When the roar faded, the air was full of a different silence, the kind that follows when a crowd has been thinned by nature and math. Mara climbed up to Sato, hands numb. His face was gray, his lips were blue, he was breathing, but each breath looked like it hurt. "You okay?" Mara asked, voice shaking. Sato tried to smile. "Didn't want my last rescue to be a tree," he rasped. Mara grabbed his harness. "You're not." He lifted a hand. "Listen," he said, "you keep them moving, you do not let the line teach you to stop." Mara swallowed hard. "I'm trying." At 05,059, the siren softened. At 06,004, Sato's breath finally caught on nothing and didn't come back. Mara held his hand until the sun rose over the ridge and the world pretended it was a normal morning. Chapter 08, No. 211. Skyridge Airfield was a fortress built out of chain link and exhaustion. It sat on a high saddle between peaks, a strip of cracked asphalt with hangars that had once stored ski resort helicopters and firefighting planes. Now the hangars held the last machines that could outrun the boundary, turboprops, old cargo haulers, anything with a wing and enough fuel to climb. Lena worked from a makeshift tower, a metal shipping container stacked on a concrete block, antennas bristling from its roof. The radios never stopped screaming. At EO 155, she took a call from a pilot that sounded like prayer. "Skyridge Tower," the pilot said. "We can take 8. That's it. 8. If you put more on me, I'll drop like a stone when icing hits." "Copy," Lena said, voice steady because steady was her last tool. "Hold at the ridge until my go." Outside the container, the crowd pushed against the fence, faces turned upward toward the runway lights like moths. Mara arrived with her people in the dark, snow crusted on her boots, Sato's absence and her posture. Jay carried a duffel full of tools. Chiron carried her instruments like they were fragile bones. Nadia carried her notebook. Tomas carried nothing but speed. "You're late," Lena said when she saw Mara. Mara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We ran into the mountain," she said. They didn't say Sato's name. They didn't need to. Grief was another kind of weather. At 02,000, the siren sounded again, softer at this elevation but no less precise. Lena watched her altitude monitor tick toward the starting line. She had barometers duct taped to the container wall, a ridiculous altar to measurements. "Starting height's 1560 tonight," she said. "Rise rate is up. We've got less than 4 hours before it eats the ridge." Jay looked out at the runway where a de-iced turboprop vibrated with impatient power. "I can keep your ground power stable," he said to Lena. "I can reroute the hangar generators. But if you're trying to fly everyone..." "We can't," Lena said. Mara stared at the crowd. "Then we pick," she said, voice flat. "It wasn't cruelty, it was arithmetic." Behind them, a new sound joined the siren, chanting from the edge of the crowd. "UPW or W ear made clean," voices intoned. "Downward, we are dust." The ascenders had arrived. Tomas spat into the snow. "They followed us," he muttered. Nadia's gaze stayed on the runway. "They follow the line," she said, "like everyone else." At 02,011, the first aircraft lifted off. It clawed into thin air, engines straining. The crowd screamed and surged, some in hope, some in rage. Then, the helicopter on Pad 2 began to spin up, an old rescue bird, paint-chipped, rotor already frosting at the tips. The pilot's voice came over Lena's headset. "Tower, we're overweight," he said. "I can take 6 max. You've got 10 on the manifest." Lena's fingers tightened on the mic. "We've got med supplies," she said. "Oxygen, antibiotics." "I don't care if you've got gold bricks," the pilot snapped. "If I can't climb, we die. You want me to throw bodies out, Tower?" Mara heard the exchange through Lena's speaker. She stepped closer, eyes on the helicopter where people were already climbing in, eyes bright with relief. "Tell him to drop the supplies," Mara said. Kieran stiffened. "Without oxygen, the higher stages." "There is no higher stage if we die on Pad 2, Mara cut in. Lena hesitated 1 heartbeat too long. On the pad, the rotor wash kicked snow into a blizzard. A child screamed. Someone tried to climb aboard over another person's back. The pilot's voice returned, harsher. "Tower, decide." Lena looked at Mara, and Mara saw the same thing she'd seen in stairwells, the moment someone realized that choosing was killing. "Drop the supplies," Lena said into the mic. The pilot swore, but relief laced it. "Copy." On the pad, a crewman shoved boxes out the open door. They tumbled, bursting, white cylinders rolling into the snow like spilled teeth. Mara flinched anyway. The helicopter lifted, wobbling, rising into the night. For a second it looked like it might make it. Then the rotor shuddered. Ice had formed faster than the de-icer could handle. The helicopter dipped, recovered, dipped again. Mara's stomach went hollow. The pilot's voice came through Lena's headset, a raw exhale. "I need more climb," he said. "I need less weight." Inside the helicopter, someone screamed. Mara couldn't see faces through the snow and rotor wash, but she could picture the math: 6 seats, 8 seats, 4 hours. A boundary that didn't negotiate. "Do it," Lena whispered, not into the mic as if the words might summon a miracle. The helicopter lurched upward again. Nothing fell. The pilot's voice returned, steady now. "We're climbing," he said. "We're—" His sentence cut off mid-word as the radio burst into static. Lena froze, staring at the crackling speaker like it had betrayed her personally. Mara watched the helicopter's lights fade into cloud. "Did it drop?" Tomas asked, voice small. Lena swallowed hard. "I don't know," she said. At Ofertunder 2000, the boundary reached the airfield's elevation plus the last of their climb margin. People who had tried to sleep on the hangar roof gasped and went still. The crowd below the fence thinned in jerks like a video buffering. Mara and her team clipped into the hangar's upper catwalk, lungs burning, watching the fence line become a place of bodies. Nadia's notebook lay open on her lap. The curve she'd drawn was no longer gentle. "We're out of mountain," she said, voice barely above the wind. "The next step isn't higher land." Kiran stared at the sky, eyes reflecting runway lights. "Then it's higher air," she said. At dawn, Victor Rourke arrived at Skyridge Airfield in a private jet that looked obscene against the snow. He stepped down the stairs in a tailored coat and stared at the bodies near the fence with a face that finally looked less like glass and more like something that could crack. He saw Mara. "Ms. Vance," he said, as if they were at a fundraiser, "I hear you've been busy." Mara's hands curled into fists. "We're all busy," she said. "Some of us just pay for it differently." Victor's gaze flicked to Nadia. "You," he said. "You're the one with the math." Nadia met his eyes without flinching. "Yes," she said. Victor nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then you know what comes next." Chapter 09, 23,055. The first balloon rose at sunset like an accusation. Victor Rourke called it a platform initiative. Kiran called it what it was: desperation made buoyant. They worked in a hangar that smelled of fuel and cold metal. They cut aircraft emergency slides into long, airtight sleeves. They sealed seams with heat guns. Well-weighted end pressure regulators from scrap oxygen systems. Thomas ran parts between workstations, his lungs still young enough to forgive the altitude, for now. Lena kept radios alive. She talked to pilots until her voice went hoarse, gathering what she could: weather data, helium sources, rumors of other balloon colonies already ripping their way into the stratosphere. Nadia watched the math. She watched Victor. Victor funded everything: tools, fuel, crew, with a calm efficiency that made Mara want to punch him. He moved through the hangar like a man who finally found the asset class that mattered. "How many can it lift?" Mara asked Kiran as they watched the balloon's envelope inflate, a pale skin swelling toward the rafters. Kiran's smile was thin. 15 if you want it to climb," she said. 30 if you want it to die slowly. Mara stared at the cluster of people already hovering nearby, faces hungry. "We'll have riots," she said. "We already do," Kiran replied. At 2355, they clipped the first 15 to the net platform beneath the balloon. It looked like a giant fisherman's web. Ropes knotted into a grid, carabiners as anchors. People lay on their stomachs like swimmers on a dock, gripping rope as if the sky might shake them loose. Mara was among the 15 because Kiran demanded a rescue lead. Nadia was among the 15 because the math was useless if it died on paper. Jay was among the 15 because he understood pressure systems the way he understood elevator guts. Lena was among the 15 because somebody had to keep the voice in the air. Lamas was not among them. He climbed onto the hangar roof anyway and ran alongside the balloon as it lifted, hands on rope, helping steady it against gusts until his feet couldn't reach. He looked up at Mara, rain-dark eyes bright with stubborn fear. "Bring it back," he shouted. Mara didn't trust herself to answer. The balloon rose through cloud into cold that made Mara's teeth ache. Below, the airfield lights shrank into a scatter of stars. The mountains became black teeth. At 0145, the siren came through Lena's headset, faint and distorted, but unmistakable. Mara's body reacted as if it could climb on reflex alone. "Starting height?" she asked. Nadia checked the sensor rig they'd strapped to the net. 17 kilometers, she said. Her voice was tight, controlled. "It's in the stratosphere now." Mara's stomach flipped. The world below them, mountains, cities, oceans, felt suddenly irrelevant compared to a number. We're at 19, Kieran said, eyes on the altitude readout frost had formed on her lashes. We've got margin. Margin, a word that used to belong to finance and now belonged to breath. At 02,000, the boundary rose beneath them. Mara couldn't see it, but she felt something change in the air below the net, an invisible pressure line, a wrongness that made her skin prickle even at this height. Then, far below, the mountains flashed with little bursts of light. Flares, signals, people still trying to climb. The boundary climbed, and the balloon drifted with jet stream winds Kieran had predicted, surfing currents like a sailor reading waves. At 02,037, a sound like a whisper became a scream. Air hissed from a seam on the balloon's envelope. Kieran's head snapped up. No, she said. The balloon sagged, barely perceptible at first, then enough that everyone felt the net tilt. Get low, Mara shouted, instinct kicking in. Spread weight. People flattened themselves, claws on rope. Someone cried out as their tether went taut. Jay crawled toward the rigging with the repair kit strapped to his chest. Where's the tier? He yelled. Kieran pointed, face pale. Upper seam, she said. If it spreads, we drop. Mara felt her chest tighten. Not from the boundary, from the cold and the idea of falling out of the sky. Kieran clipped her harness to a line and began climbing the net toward the envelope. Mara followed because rescue was a verb, not a job title. The wind of the envelope was vicious. It slapped the balloon skin, trying to turn it inside out. Kieran pressed a patch over the seam with gloved hands that were already stiffening. Hold it, Kieran shouted. Mara braced her body against the swaying net, pressing her forearms into the balloon's cold skin, feeling the vibration of escaping gas through the fabric like a heartbeat leaving. Jay reached them and slapped another patch over the seam, then tightened a strap around it like a tourniquet. The hiss diminished. Mara exhaled shakily. Was that an accident? She asked, voice low. Kieran's eyes flicked down toward the net platform where the others clung. Nothing up here is an accident, she said. At 0559, the siren softened in Lena's headset, a distant sigh. The balloon had held its altitude barely. Frost covered the ropes. People's lips were blue. Their eyes were wide and glittering with hypoxia and relief. Dawn in the stratosphere was cruelly beautiful. The sun rose over the curve of the earth, light spilling across cloud tops like a tide of gold. Mara looked down at the world and thought of Tomas on the hangar roof, hands on rope, helping lift them into safety. She had never hated height more. Chapter 10, 01033. The second balloon didn't have time to be built properly. They built it anyway. The boundary's nightly climb had become a sprint. What had once been meters per minute became tens of meters, then hundreds. Nadia watched her curve steepen until it stopped being a curve and started being a wall. It's accelerating, she told them, voice rough from cold, doubling every week. If that holds, the boundary will reach the ceiling of what balloons can do within a month. And after that? Jay asked. Nadia didn't answer immediately, as if she could soften it by waiting. After that, she said, there isn't air left to climb through. Victor Rourke heard her and went quiet in a way that made Mara nervous. He had always looked like a man who believed there was a purchase he could make to solve any problem. He was running out of things to buy. They expanded the flotilla, 3 balloons, then 5, net platforms linked by ropes like a drifting village. People moved between them in harnesses, clipped to lines, their bodies swinging over a black drop. Lena stayed with Tomas on the ground as long as she could, running comms until the airfield itself became too low to survive the 2-6 window. She climbed into the flotilla on the 7th night, hauling radios and guilt with her. Tomas climbed after her because he always climbed. He arrived on the net platform shaking, lips cracked, eyes furious. I'm not staying down there, he said to Mara, not again. Mara wanted to tell him no. She wanted to tell him he was 17 and the sky was not a playground. She looked at his hands, raw, calloused, competent, and heard Sato's voice in her head, you keep them moving. Clip in, she said instead. At 001,033 on the 9th night, Mara woke to a new sound, the faint, deliberate scrape of metal on rope. She rolled onto her stomach, cold seeping through her jacket, and saw a figure crawling along the line between platforms. The figure held something sharp. Mara's heart kicked. She crawled silently, body low, and grabbed the figure's ankle. The person yelped and twisted, and their hood fell back. It was a woman with a shaved head and eyes bright with fanatic calm. What are you doing? Mara hissed. The woman smiled, teeth chattering in the cold. Saving you, she whispered, from false ascent. Mara saw the blade, a utility knife. She saw the rope fibers already fraying. Mara slammed the woman's wrist into the net until the knife clattered away. Tomas, awake now, lunged and pinned the woman's shoulders. "Ascender," Tomas spat. The woman laughed softly. "Upward we are made clean," she whispered. "Downward we are." "Shut up," Mara snarled and zip-tied her hands with a cable tie. Kiran's face appeared from the shadows, exhausted and furious. "How many?" she demanded. The Ascender's smile widened. "Enough," she said. As if on cue, another hiss began. Somewhere above them, a seam giving way. Kiran's eyes went wide. "No," she breathed and scrambled toward the rigging. The siren started at EO 1045, muffled through Lena's headset. The timing was obscene. "We don't have time," Chase said, already moving. "If we drop even 100 meters." "I know," Kiran snapped, clipping her harness and climbing toward the envelope with the repair kit. Mara followed, knife in hand now because she no longer trusted accidents. The tear was larger this time, a long rip along a seam. Gas streamed out in a glittering frost plume. Karan pressed a patch over it, then another, hands shaking. The wind fought her, peeling the patch edges. "Hold it," she shouted. Mara braced against the balloon skin, forearms burning. Jay tightened straps. The tear still hissed, still widened. At 0159, Nadia's voice came through the headset tight with fear. "The starting line is at 23 kilometers tonight," she said. "It's already here." Mara looked down. The world beneath them was black and distant. She couldn't see the boundary, but she felt it as a pressure rising through the air like a tide coming for their ankles. At 02,000, the boundary rose into their range. The air below their net went wrong. Someone on the platform took a panicked breath and gagged, then forced themselves to breathe shallowly, eyes wild. "Climb," Kiran screamed. "We need lift now." But lift was leaking. Kiran did something Mara didn't expect. She unclipped from the safety line. For a heartbeat, she hung by one hand on the balloon seam, body pressed to the skin, the other hand slapping a patch directly over the rip while the wind tried to rip her away. "Kiran," Mara shouted. Kiran looked down once, eyes bright with cold clarity. "Tie it," she yelled. "Tie it or we all die." Jay lunged to clip her back in. The balloon shuddered. The patch held barely. Kiran's gloved fingers, numb and clumsy now, missed the safety line. Mara saw it happen in slow motion. Kiran's hand sliding, her body peeling away from the balloon skin, the net rope not close enough. Kiran fell. She didn't scream. The cold stole sound. The darkness swallowed her, a single human weight dropping toward a world that no longer had room for her. The balloon lurched upward as the leak slowed and the lost weight changed the math. Mara clung to the rigging and felt the sick relief of survival that tasted like betrayal. On the platform below, the Ascender woman laughed until Tomas punched her in the mouth and she went quiet. At 0559, the siren softened. Mara stared into the brightening sky where Kiran had vanished and realized that the boundary didn't need to kill you directly. It only needed to force you to become the kind of person who could watch someone fall. Chapter 11, W0159. The rocket was an old dream dragged into a new nightmare. Nadia knew about it from training, a mothballed research vehicle stored at the High Plateau Aerospace Range meant for suborbital experiments that had once seemed daring. It was small, ugly, and, according to every official document, non-operational. Official documents belonged to the old world. Victor Rourke bought them access to the range with the same skill he'd used to buy penthouses. He arrived with contracts, fuel, and people in uniforms who still believed in paperwork. Mara watched him sign lives into place with a pen and wondered how many signatures it would take to erase what he'd done at the Ascendant Spire. They assembled the rocket beneath the largest balloon in the flotilla, a pale giant swaying in the stratosphere. Jay called it an elevator with one stop. Tomas called it insane. Lena called it a chance. They called it Periapsis because Nadia refused to let it have a corporate name. The capsule held 3. Only 3. They argued for hours in clipped voices, breath fogging in the cold. "You need Nadia," Jay said, practical. "No Nadia, no trajectory." "You need Mara," Lena said, quieter. "If anything goes wrong in that capsule, she's the only one who can keep you alive." Tomas stepped forward, eyes burning. "Then you need me," he said. "I kept you alive down there. I ran messages. I climbed." Mara's throat tightened. "Tomas," she began. "No," Tomas snapped. "Don't do that. Don't talk like I'm a kid." Victor Rourke watched them from the edge of the net platform, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. "There are always more volunteers than seats," he said softly. Mara turned on him. "You don't get to sound wise," she said. Victor's gaze didn't flinch. No, he agreed, I don't. He looked at the capsule, at the 3 molded seats, at the math calculations Nadia had scribbled on a pad. I built my life on height, Victor said. I thought it was safety. It was just distance. No one spoke. Victor inhaled slowly, as if savoring air while it still worked. The 3 are Nadia, he said, Mara, and Jay. Tomas's face went white. No, he said. Why him? Jay's eyes widened. Why me? He echoed, genuinely shocked. Victor looked at Jay. Because you keep machines alive, he said, and because Mara trusts you. Mara stared at Victor, suspicion flaring. And you? She asked. You're not taking your seat? Victor almost smiled. I never had a seat, he said. I had leverage. He stepped closer to Tomas. You'll live, he said. You're good at it. Use that. Tomas's jaw trembled. You don't get to decide, he whispered. Victor nodded once, accepting the hate like a debt. No, he said, but I can pay for my decisions now. Lena took Tomas's hand, an anchoring gesture, small and fierce. We keep the flotilla alive, she said. We keep people climbing. That's not nothing. Tomas pulled his hand free, then clipped himself to the rigging so hard the carabiner rang. At 1045, the siren began, faint through the thin air. Nadia's monitor blinked the starting height, 31 kilometers. They were at 34. Martin measured in breaths. Jay crawled into the capsule first, hand steady in a way Mara had never seen on him before. He strapped in and began checking gauges with a technician's devotion. Nadia climbed in next, face set, eyes shining. She looked back once at the net platform, at Lena, at Tomas, at Victor. If we make orbit, she said, voice tight, we find out what this is. Mara climbed in last. She clipped her harness and paused, looking at the open hatch as if it were a doorway to every night she'd survived and every person she hadn't. Victor stepped closer to the capsule and met her gaze. Don't waste it, he said. Mara wanted to spit in his face. Instead, she nodded once because anger didn't change the math either. The hatch sealed with a metallic thunk that sounded like a coffin deciding to be a cradle. Inside, the capsule was cramped and smelled of plastic and old dreams. Jay's hands moved over switches. Nadia's voice counted softly. Mara listened to her own breathing. Ignition on my mark, Nadia said. The balloon above them swayed, holding the rocket like a pendulum in a black sky. At 1059, the boundary began to rise beneath them, an invisible cliff climbing toward their altitude. The capsule's sensors ticked. A warning tone chirped, higher, higher, higher. Nadia's voice became iron. Mark? The rocket ignited. Acceleration slammed Mara into her seat. The capsule shook as if trying to tear itself apart. The balloon vanished behind them, dropping away like a shed skin. Through a small window, Mara saw the net platform shrink into a knot of rope and light. She saw Lena's headlamp, a star that would never reach her now. She saw Tomas's silhouette, fist raised, nodding goodbye, but in defiance. Victor Rourke stood at the edge of the platform, coat whipping in the wind, looking up as if he were finally learning what awe felt like. Then the clouds swallowed them. Chapter 12, 0158. Orbit was quiet in a way the rooftops had never been. The capsule, Periapsis, fell around the Earth in a thin shell of metal that creaked and popped with temperature shifts. There was no wind, no siren, no crowd, only the hiss of life support and the soft click of Jay's hands checking systems like prayer. Mara floated with her harness straps biting her hips, staring at the curve of the planet through the window. From up here, the oceans looked calm, the clouds looked innocent, the cities were dark smudges. We made it, Jay whispered, voice cracking on the word like he didn't trust it. Nadia didn't smile. Her eyes were on her makeshift sensor rig, the one she'd built from scavenged instruments and stubbornness. It was taped to the panel with strips of cloth like a charm. We made orbit, she corrected. That's not the same as safe. Mara swallowed. You said that on the platform, she said. You said even orbit isn't automatically safe. Nadia's hands shook as she adjusted the sensor's alignment toward a field of stars. The boundary behaves like a plane, she murmured, if it's fixed relative to... The capsule clock blinked. 01508. Mara's skin prickled anyway, the way it had on roofs and in stairwells, the way her body had learned to fear a number. It's stupid, Jay said, forcing a small laugh. There's no 2 a.m. up here. Lena's last radio transmission still echoed in Mara's memory, keep people climbing. Down there, somewhere under cloud, people were climbing. Mara closed her eyes for a second and imagined the siren starting in 1,000 valleys. At 02,000, Nadia's sensor chirped. A single sharp tone. The screen she'd rigged from an old flight computer flickered from green to red. Mara's eyes snapped open. "What is that?" she demanded. Nadia stared as if she'd been punched. "The boundary," she whispered. Jay fluttered closer, face pale. "It can't be," he said. "We're, 200 kilometers up?" Nadia's voice came out hoarse. "The rise rate isn't meters anymore," she said. "It's kilometers. It's climbing through the upper atmosphere." Mara's mouth went dry. "So it reaches orbit," she said. Nadia shook her head, slow. "Not exactly," she said. "Look." On the sensor's display, a line, an abstract representation, cut across their orbital path like a blade. Not a circle around Earth, a plane, a slice. "It isn't rising," Nadia said, and Mara heard the same words she'd spoken on that wind-sheltered alcove weeks ago. "It's our reference that's changing. The activation aligns with local time because the plane is keyed to the planet, like it's being swept." Jay's fingers gripped a handhold. "Swept by what?" Nadia didn't answer. Her gaze went to the window. Mara followed it and saw something she hadn't noticed before. A faint, impossible sheen across the darkness, like a thin aurora stretched into a perfectly straight band. A line drawn in space. For a moment, it looked like a horizon that didn't belong to Earth. Mara's stomach rolled. "That's real," she whispered. "Ah!" The red warning tone pulsed again. Nadia's eyes snapped back to her calculations. "We don't have much time before our orbit carries us through it," she said. "If the active boundary intersects our path." "Then we breeze nothing," Jay finished, voice flat. Mara grabbed the handhold beside the small thruster control panel. "Can we raise our orbit?" she asked. Nadia's jaw clenched. "Yes," she said, "for a while." "For how long?" Mara demanded. Nadia didn't look at her. "Long enough to find out what else is up here," she said, "or long enough to die somewhere with a better view." Jay floated toward the thruster panel, hands steady again because terror had given him purpose. "Tell me what to do," he said. Nadia's voice sharpened. "Prograde burn," she said. "Small, now." Jay's fingers moved. A vibration ran through the capsule as the thrusters fired, a gentle push that felt insultingly small compared to the rocket's violence. Through the window, Earth slid beneath them, indifferent. The red warning tone did not stop. Mara looked at Nadia. "If we keep burning," she said, "we run out of fuel." Nadia met her gaze at last. In her eyes, Mara saw exhaustion, grief, and something like wonder twisted into dread. "Then we learn fast," Nadia said. The capsule clock ticked onward, uncaring. Outside, the straight band of light held its position against the stars as if nailed there. Down on Earth, in 1,000 places, the siren was beginning again. In orbit, the indicators stayed red. At 2000 a.m., the death line rose.